I always thought the worst pain of my life was the day the doctor told me I would never have biological kids. I was wrong. The worst pain came 2 years later when I was holding a 3-month-old baby in my arms, feeling him fall asleep on my chest like that was always his place, and I heard the news that the biological mother had come back to take him. In that moment I looked up at the ceiling and I screamed at God. I said things I am ashamed to repeat. But what happened after that scream changed my life forever, and it did not end there. Because a few years after that, in a doctor's office, I saw a lab result that shifted everything I thought I knew about who God is. If you are going through a pain that feels like it has no way out, I need you to stay until the end of this story, because what God did in my life, He can do in yours too. There is something I have learned in these past few years. Our lives have 2 kinds of chapters. There is the chapter we choose, and there is the chapter that chooses us. I was always the kind of man who liked to write his own chapters. I am organized. I have a spreadsheet for everything. When I was 22, I planned my whole life out on an Excel sheet. How much I would be making at 30, when I would buy my first house, when I would have my first kid, and I checked off almost everything on that list. Almost. It was exactly where the spreadsheet did not obey that God taught me everything I needed to know. My name is Rafael Vasquez. I am 34 years old. I am a civil engineer. I work for a construction firm here in the city. I drive a decent car. We live in a 3-bedroom apartment, and I married Beatrice B. when we were both 25. From the outside, my life always looked predictable, picture perfect, the kind of life that fills up an Instagram feed nicely. But there is something nobody posts on Instagram. The night when the apartment goes dark and quiet, and you are lying in bed staring at the ceiling, and the ceiling does not give you a single answer. I spent a lot of nights like that. And those are the nights I am going to tell you about. My family came over from down south when I was a baby. I grew up speaking Spanish at home and English everywhere else. My abuela was the one who first told me about Jesus. She had a little Bible on her nightstand, and she would pray over me every night I stayed at her house. I gave my life to Christ at 14, at a youth retreat with our church. It is a bilingual church, mostly Hispanic, on the east side of the city. Pastor preaches Spanish first service, English second service. Since I was 17, I tithed faithfully, served as a youth leader, married a virgin, did everything right. At least that is what I thought. Deep down, without ever saying it out loud, I believed that if I did everything right, God would make everything right for me. It was a silent agreement, almost a contract. I do my part, Lord, you do yours. It took me years to find out that contract did not exist, and that the fact it did not exist was the biggest mercy God could have shown me. B and I wanted to be parents from day one. When we were dating, we used to joke we were going to have 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl. We even had names picked: Mateo, Lucas, and Ana Clara. When we got married, we decided to wait 1 year before we started trying, enjoy being newlyweds, take a couple of trips, buy furniture. Then in our 2nd year we started trying for real. A year went by. Nothing. 2 years. Nothing. B started getting anxious. I pretended to be calm, but every month I prayed silently when she was about to take the test, and every month she would come out of the bathroom with that broken smile. In our 3rd year we decided to see a doctor. B did her tests. Everything normal. I went after, thinking it was going to be quick, thinking it was just going to confirm I was fine too. I will never forget that appointment. The doctor was a man in his 60s, little glasses on the tip of his nose. He read the results, read them again, took the glasses off, cleaned them on his shirt, put them back on. I already knew something was wrong. He looked at me and said it straight up. "Rafael, your test shows azoospermia. In simple terms, Your body does not produce sperm. It is not a question of low count. It is complete absence. I went mute. He kept talking about treatments, possibilities, some kind of testicular sperm extraction procedure with a low success rate in my case. But I was not listening anymore. I left the office, got in my car, and sat there in the parking lot for almost an hour before I could drive. The first thing that came into my head was B. How was I going to tell her? She wanted to be a mom more than anything in the world. And I, her husband, I was the problem. I could not give her the one thing she wanted most. I got home. She was in the kitchen, making dinner. The whole apartment smelled like the arroz con pollo my mom had taught her to make. When she saw me, she knew. She put the spoon down and walked over to me. I started crying before I even spoke. I told her everything the doctor had said. She held me and said it was going to be okay. We would figure something out. But I saw something in her eyes she tried to hide. It was the first time in my life I saw B broken. And I was the reason. That night I could not sleep. I just stared at the ceiling. And for the first time in my adult life, I picked a fight with God. I said things. I told him it was not fair. I told him I had done everything right. I had been faithful. I had served. I had tithed. Why me? Why did B have to suffer? Because of something wrong with me. I remembered the psalmist when he said in Psalm 38 that his pain was continually before him. That was exactly how I felt. The months that followed were the worst of my life. I pulled away from church on the inside. Not from the congregation completely. I still showed up Sundays, but my heart was closed. When pastor preached about God's faithfulness, I would laugh inside. When somebody got up to give a testimony of blessing, I felt anger. I would watch B singing during worship with tears running down her face, and I could not sing anymore. I started pulling away from her too, physically, emotionally. I felt like I had failed as a man, as a husband, as a Christian, and the more she tried to bring me back, the more I shut myself in. We tried treatments. We did the procedure the doctor talked about. It did not work. We tried it a second time. Did not work. The doctor suggested another path that involved a donor. B looked at me right there next to him, and I said no. I could not. I could not picture raising a child that was not mine, but would be hers. It was a selfishness I carried around and was ashamed to admit. B accepted my decision without a fight. But that night she cried in the bathroom, thinking I could not hear her. I heard her. It was a Wednesday, about 1.5 years after the diagnosis, that everything started to change. B had gone to prayer night at church, and I had stayed home like I always did back then. I picked up the Bible that had been collecting dust on the shelf. I do not know why. Maybe because the silence in the apartment was suffocating me. I opened it at random and landed in 1 Samuel chapter 1. The story of Hannah. Hannah, the woman who could not have children, who cried in the temple, who was humiliated, who prayed with such bitterness in her soul that the priest Eli thought she was drunk. And Hannah made a promise to God. If God gave her a son, she would give that son back to God. I read that passage 3 times. When I got to the part where God remembered Hannah, I started crying. It was not crying of sadness. It was something different. It was the crying of someone being remembered by God. I closed the Bible, got down on my knees on the living room floor, and prayed a prayer I had never prayed before. I told God I was surrendering my will, that if He had a different plan than mine, I wanted to know that plan, that if being a biological father was not for me, I wanted Him to change my heart so I could accept His path. When B got home, I was sitting on the couch. She saw my eyes were red. I called her over to sit next to me. I told her I had been a selfish husband for the past months. I asked for forgiveness for rejecting the donor option, but more than that, I asked forgiveness for shutting her out. And then I said the word I had not been able to say in all those months: adoption. I told B, I think God is calling us to adopt. B looked at me for about 10 seconds without saying a word. and then she hugged me, and we cried together for I do not know how long. The adoption journey is something nobody can prepare you to understand. When we decided, we thought it was going to be a matter of months. We watched videos online. We talked to our pastor. We found an adoption attorney. We signed up with an agency. And that is when we found out it was a long process, full of paperwork, evaluations, hearings, prep classes. We had to take a mandatory pre-adoption training. We had to pass a psychological evaluation. We had to go through a home study with a social worker. Each step felt like a giant iron door we had to push open. But I remember every night, before we went to sleep, I would take B's hand and we would pray together. For the child we did not know yet, for the biological parents, for the process. And for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. I remember one specific night during the prep class. The counselor told us something that stuck with me. She said adoption is not about putting a child into a family. Adoption is God placing two broken stories in the same room so he can build a new story. I looked at B and she was crying. I cried too, because in that moment I understood my broken story. The story of my infertility was not a punishment. It was a path. God was preparing me for something bigger. And somewhere in this city, or in this state, or somewhere else in this country, there was a child whose story was also broken. And God was already preparing our meeting. It took almost 2 years from when we got on the list until we got the first call. B was at work. I was at a job site, supervising a foundation pour. The phone rang. It was the agency. There was a 3-month-old baby available for adoption. Boy. Healthy. Biological mother had voluntarily relinquished. Biological father unknown. He was at a transitional placement home about 2 hours from our city. If we wanted, we could come meet him the next day. I called B right away. She started crying on the phone, in the middle of her office in front of her whole team. We barely slept that night. B had bought baby clothes a few months back. Without telling me, she showed me a bottle, a towel, a little light blue onesie with a lion embroidered on the chest. I looked at her and asked, "What if it is a girl?" She said, "Then we buy girl stuff." And then her smile changed. She said, "Rafa, what if it is him? What if he is our son?" I took her hand and said, "If God is bringing us there tomorrow, it is because it is meant to be." We left early, 2-hour drive that felt like 10. When we got to the placement home, a social worker named Elena came to greet us. She explained everything. The baby had been relinquished by the biological mother, a 19-year-old girl with a difficult history, drugs, living on the streets for part of the pregnancy, but she had entered a recovery program at the end of her pregnancy, had the baby in a county hospital, and had decided to place him for adoption right after birth, saying she wanted her son to have a life she could not give him. Eleanor said it was a beautiful case because the biological mother had relinquished consciously, without pressure, and had asked the adoptive parents to give the boy the name David, because she believed he was going to be a brave boy, like David in the Bible. When Elena opened the door to the nursery, I saw him. David was lying in a white crib, wearing a light green onesie. He had thin, dark hair, big cheeks, tiny hands. He was awake, looking up at the ceiling, making little baby sounds. B picked him up first. She held him in her arms, and he turned his little face and looked at her. And in that moment I saw B transform. I saw something in her eyes I had never seen. I saw the mom she had always been on the inside, finally coming out. And then she handed him to me. I held David. He was light, warm. He smelled like milk. He turned his face and looked at me, and I swear, in that moment, time stopped. I remembered the verse in Proverbs 30 that says there are 3 things too wonderful for me to understand. And I thought, 4 things. The 4th is holding for the first time the child God set apart for you before the world even existed. We spent 3 hours with him that day. The social worker explained we needed a transition period with frequent visits before we could take him home. We did everything. We drove to that placement home every single weekday for the next 4 weeks. We worked it out with our jobs. Left in the morning, drove 2 hours, spent 3 or 4 hours with David, drove back. We did that every day. I gave him a bottle for the first time, changed a diaper for the first time, saw him smile for the first time. I cannot explain it to anyone who has not been there, but the bond you build with a child you know is going to be your son is just as real as any biological bond, maybe more real because it is built on presence, on sacrifice, on choice. At the end of 4 weeks, the judge granted us provisional custody. We brought David home on a Saturday morning. I will never forget that day. B put him in the car seat. I drove slower than I have ever driven in my life. I checked the rearview mirror every 5 seconds. When we got to the apartment, B looked at me at the front door and said, "Rafa, let us walk into our home with our son." That sentence took me out. I carried David inside, showed him his room. He was sleeping, so he did not see anything. But I showed him. I said, "Son, this is your room. This is your spot. God blessed our home today." The first weeks were intense. Sleepless nights, bottles every 3 hours. B took the maternity leave her company offered, even though it was not legally required. I took 20 days of accumulated vacation. We lived in our own little bubble. Our church organized a late baby shower for us. The brothers and sisters from church brought diapers, baby clothes, food, and prayers. Our moms came over to visit. My mother-in-law cried so hard when she held David, she could not say a word for like 20 minutes. It was like all those years of suffering had finally turned into this beautiful 8-pound thing. Then came the blow. It was a Tuesday. David was 4.5 months old. He had been with us at home for almost 2 months. The phone rang. It was Elena from the agency. Her voice was different. She said, "Rafael, I have to tell you something hard. The biological mother has come back. She completed her treatment for substance addiction, found a job, and she wants to reverse her decision. She wants David back." I sat down on the kitchen floor with the phone in my hand. B came running. I could not speak. When I could, I told her. B picked David up out of his crib. He was sleeping, and she pressed him to her chest and started crying in a way I had never seen. It was a cry of visceral pain. It was a mother feeling like she was about to lose her son. Eleanor explained that legally, during the placement period, before the final adoption was finalized, the biological mother still had the right to request reversal, and the judge had to evaluate. There would be a psychosocial evaluation, and there was no telling for sure how it would turn out. There was a real chance David could go back to the biological mother. The next 3 weeks were torture. I tried to work, but I could not focus. B would not put David down. She slept with him on her chest. The little moments of joy were cut short by the fear of losing him. I remember waking up in the middle of the night and going to his room, just standing there watching him sleep, and crying silently so I would not wake B up. I would say, "Lord, I cannot survive losing him. I cannot. I would rather die." And it was in that moment, in the middle of that anguish, that God spoke to me. It was not an audible voice. It was a word in my soul. I was reading the story of Abraham, when God asked him to give up Isaac, the son of the promise. The son Abraham had waited for years, and Abraham obeyed. And as he was going up the mountain with the wood and his son, he told the servant, "The boy and I are going up there to worship, and we will return." We will return. Plural. Abraham believed that even if he had to give Isaac up, God would be faithful. I closed the Bible and said out loud in the empty room, "Lord, David is not mine. He is yours. If your will is for him to stay with us, I thank you. If your will is for him to go back to his biological mother, then let your will be done, not mine. But Lord, I ask you one thing. If he has to go, please take care of him the way you take care of every child. Let him grow up knowing you. Wherever he ends up, let him know there is a God who loves him." That night I slept for the first time in 3 weeks. It was not a passive surrender. It was an active offering. It was placing in God's hands the thing I loved most in the world, knowing God's hands are better than mine. The hearing was set for a Thursday. We went with our lawyer. I remember walking into the family court, building shaking. Bea was right next to me. David's biological mother, whose name was Camila, was sitting on the other side of the room with her lawyer. I had never seen her before. She was a girl. She was 20. Skinny, hair pulled back, wearing a white blouse. When our eyes met, I saw something in her I was not expecting. I saw fear, and I saw love for David, the same love I had. The judge called everyone in. She talked to Camila, talked to us, read the reports, and then she did something nobody saw coming. She put the hearing on pause for an hour. She said she wanted Camila and us to talk alone in a room, no lawyers, nobody else. She said David was not a document. He was a child, and 3 Christian adults, or that was what was in the file, would be able to make a decision that considered what was best for him. We went into a room, me, Bea, and Camila, the 3 of us sitting around a table. For a whole minute nobody said anything. Then Camila started. She said she had given David up because she had been in a really bad place. She had lived on the streets. She had used drugs. She had been through things she did not want to talk about. She had almost died during the pregnancy. But she had been rescued by a Christian woman who took her to a recovery center. There she met Jesus for the first time in her life. And when David was born, she thought giving him up for adoption was an act of love. But in the months since she gave him up, she had been wondering if it had been selfishness, if she should have fought to keep him. That is why she had filed for reversal. Then Camila looked at Bea, and she asked, "Do you love my son?" Bea started crying, and she said, "I love David more than my own life. I have loved him from the first day. I held him in my arms. I would love him every day until the last day God gives me on this earth. But Camila, I know you are his mother. I know you carried him in your womb. If you want him back, he is yours. There is nothing I can fight against that." Camila looked at Bea for a long time. Then she looked at me. She asked, "Raphael, did you have biological children before?" I said, "No, I cannot. I am sterile." That is when we found out. That is when we decided to adopt. And in that moment, Camila started crying. She cried a heavy cry with sobs. She said, "You know what I asked God for when I was at the recovery center? I asked him to give my son to a father and a mother who could love him the way I could not. Who would have the means? Who would know Jesus? When I saw you guys at the first hearing, and I read the file, I saw you were the answer to my prayer. But then a mother's heart spoke louder. I wanted my son." We sat there in silence. I took Bea's hand. Camila wiped her face, and then she said something I will carry into eternity. She said, "I do not think God brought me here today to take David back. I think he brought me here so I could confirm with my own words the surrender I made with my heart. David is your son. I just ask one thing. I ask that he know that there was a biological mother who loved him so much she gave him up so he could have a better life. And I ask that one day, when he is an adult, you let me meet him, so I can look at him and tell him every tear was worth it." Bea got up and hugged Camila. The 2 of them cried a cry that was mother to mother. I stepped in and held both of them. I remembered the verse in Psalm 133 that says how good and pleasant it is when brothers live in unity. In that room, there was no winner and no loser. There were 3 people recognizing that God had drawn a story bigger than any of us. The judge came back in. Camila told her she was withdrawing her petition. The judge cried too. I do not think she had ever seen something like that in her career. The final ruling came a few weeks later. David officially became our son. He has our last name now, but the name David we kept. The biological mother chose it, and we honor that choice every day. There is another part of this story I need to tell you. And this part right here, listen up, because this is the part that took me the longest to wrap my head around. I am going to tell it slow, because that is how it happened in my life. Slow, the way God usually works. Slow and steady. David was almost 3. He was running around the house, talking in full sentences, calling B mommy and me puppy, in that little voice that melts you down to nothing. We had already moved past the pain of infertility. Truly, that wound that seemed like it would never heal had become a scar, and the scar had become a story, and the story had become a testimony. We were not even thinking about biological kids anymore. That chapter was closed. B had been a mom, I had been a dad, and the author of our story was God. We were good. It was a Monday in fall when B started feeling something off. Tiredness. The kind of tiredness that drops on your body like a heavy blanket. She would work all day, take care of David, and she would be passed out on the couch by 9 at night. I started thinking it was strange. I told her she should see a doctor. She thought it was anemia. Bought an iron supplement. It did not help. Then came the nausea. Not food nausea. Smell nausea. The smell of coffee. The smell of gas when we were filling up the car. The smell of laundry detergent. B was walking around the grocery store with her nose pinched. I did not even consider the possibility. Not for a second. To me, after 8 years of marriage and an azoospermia diagnosis, pregnancy was not a word in our vocabulary. I thought it was stress. I thought it was a stomach bug. I thought it was something worse. I got scared. I took her to a primary care doctor. The doctor heard the symptoms, took her blood pressure, looked at her eyes. And then he asked something that froze B. He asked, "When was your last period?" B looked at me. I looked at her. She stopped to think. It had been more than a month and a half. Maybe 2 months. B had had irregular cycles since she was a teenager. We never paid attention to that. She said, "Doctor, but we cannot have kids. My husband has azoospermia." The doctor raised an eyebrow. He said, "Then we just rule it out. Take a test and rule it out." B stopped at the pharmacy on the way home, bought a test just to be safe. The basic kind. We got home. She went into the bathroom. I stayed in the kitchen putting David's dinner on the table. David was on the couch watching cartoons. The house still smelled like the food B had cooked earlier. I did not even pay attention. I figured she would come out of the bathroom in a minute with a negative test in her hand, and we would laugh at the primary care doctor. She took a while. 5 minutes. 7. I started to get suspicious. I got up from the chair to walk over to the bathroom, and right then the bathroom door opened. B was standing in the doorway. She had the test in her hand. Her face was wet, but she was not crying. She was frozen, like she had forgotten to breathe. Her eyes locked on mine. I said, "My amor, it is negative, right?" She shook her head no. I said, "Then it is invalid. You can take another one." She shook her head no again. I said, "But B, say something." Then she handed me the test. 2 lines. 2 bright red lines. I held that test and just stared. I stared at it so hard. I think if I closed my eyes today, I would still see those 2 red lines. I said, "This is wrong." B said, "Rafa, these do not get it wrong." I said, "This one did. We are going back." I grabbed my keys. Walked out with the keys in my hand. I did not even put on real shoes. Walked out in slippers. Walked to the pharmacy on the corner. Bought 3 different tests. Different brands. Different sensitivity levels. Came back running. Said, "B, take all 3. We are ruling this out." B took all 3. All 3 came back positive. I sat down on the bedroom floor. Not on the bed. The floor. I leaned my back against the side of the bed and stared at the closet. I was not talking. I was not thinking. It was like my brain had shut down to process information that did not fit. B sat down next to me on the floor. She put her head on my shoulder. The two of us sat there in silence for like 20 minutes. David came into the room at some point, asked why we were on the floor. I said it was a game. He laughed and walked off. Then B started crying quietly, and so did I. But it was a different crying than the one from 8 years before. It was the crying of someone looking at a miracle and not knowing what to do with it. We made an appointment with B's OB-GYN the next day. The doctor did an ultrasound. There it was, on the black and white screen, a tiny dot with a heartbeat. 5 weeks and 2 days, single baby, everything looking healthy. The doctor did not even know our story. B told her. She said, "Doctor, my husband has been diagnosed with azoospermia." The doctor looked at me. She said, "Raphael, you need to repeat the test." I scheduled it for the next day, at the same lab as 8 years before. Same building. I swear, brother, I walked into that lab feeling like time had folded over on itself. I remembered me at 26 walking in there, the first time, full of hope, expecting good news. And I was looking at Raphael at 34 walking in now, not understanding anything anymore about his own life. I did the test. The results would be in 3 days. Those 3 days were a faith exercise I had never done. I would go to work and think about the test, eat lunch thinking about the test, take a shower thinking about the test. B was already pregnant. That was a fact. Her belly was going to start growing in a few months. But the test was going to tell me something specific. It was going to tell me what had changed and why it had changed. The night before I picked up the result, I did not sleep. I went out to the living room in the middle of the night, sat on the couch, opened that old Bible that had brought me back to God years before, and I landed in Luke chapter 1, the story of Zechariah and Elizabeth, an older couple, no children. Elizabeth was barren, and the angel appeared to Zechariah and said, "Your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will have a son." Zechariah did not believe, and the angel answered with a line that cut me in half. The angel said to Zechariah, "I am Gabriel, who stands in the presence of God." What do you mean, in the presence of God? Like a credential? Like he was saying, "Zechariah, I live in the place where impossibility does not exist. I come from a place where your azoospermia has no word. I come from the presence of the one who creates from nothing what does not yet exist." And I closed the Bible, knelt down on the living room rug, and I confessed to God I had not understood, until that night, who he really was. I said, "Lord, I served you my whole life thinking you were powerful enough to answer prayer. But I had never thought you were powerful enough to rewrite human biology. Forgive me for making you small in my mind." I picked up the test result Friday morning. I went alone. B wanted to come, but I asked her to stay. I wanted to open that envelope myself. I sat in the car in the lab parking lot with the white envelope in my lap, and I tore it open, took the paper out. The numbers were there. Sperm concentration, motility, morphology, all within normal range, all normal, as if azoospermia had never existed, as if those 8 years of diagnosis had been a bad dream I had finally woken up from. I did not cry right then. It was funny. I started laughing. By myself, in the car, in a lab parking lot, I laughed, loud. I really laughed, until my stomach hurt, because I had finally gotten the joke. The joke was my unbelief. The joke was thinking God needed my permission to do a miracle. The joke was my Excel sheet. I went back to the urologist's office a week later. Same doctor who had given me the diagnosis 8 years before. He was older now, more white in his hair, but it was him. I showed him both tests, the old one and the new one. He laid them side by side on his desk, looked at them, took his glasses off, cleaned them, put them back on, same as that first appointment. But this time, when he looked at me, he was speechless. He said, "Raphael, I have seen a lot of strange things in my career. Cases of fertility coming back. Rare cases. But a zoospermia confirmed by 2 tests months apart, with a testicular biopsy showing complete absence of production that does not reverse. It does not reverse without intervention, and even with intervention, it rarely fully reverses. I have no clinical explanation for this. I cried in front of him. I said, "Doctor, I have an explanation." And you know what it is? He shook his head and gave me a smile that was sad and beautiful at the same time. He said, "Raphael, in my profession we learn pretty early that there are things even medicine cannot explain. I am happy for you." The pregnancy was smooth. B had the normal nausea. Her feet swelled toward the end. She craved mango with chili and lime in one phase. I did with her everything we had not done before. We bought baby gear together. I painted the nursery. I put the crib together. Every routine pregnancy thing was, for me, a silent worship. When I tightened a screw on the crib, I gave thanks. When I stuck a decal on the wall, I gave thanks. We went back to the name. B asked me, "My amor, can it be Anna Clara? The name we picked when we were dating?" I said yeah, but with one extra reason. Anna, after Hannah from 1 Samuel, the one who brought me back to God when I was about to give up. Anna Clara is a name of a promise fulfilled. There was one night I will never forget. B was 8 months along. We were lying in bed. David was already asleep in his room. I put my hand on B's belly. Anna Clara was moving, kicking, and then this wave came over me, a wave of something stirring in my chest. I thought about Raphael 5 years before, on the living room floor, fighting with God. I thought about Raphael who looked at the ceiling in the middle of the night and said he would rather die than lose David. I thought about Raphael who put his son down on the floor of his house and gave him to God, saying that if his will was different, his will be done. And I thought about that Raphael lying there, with his hand on his wife's belly, feeling his biological daughter kick, with his adopted son sleeping in the next room. And I cried quietly so I would not wake B up. I said, "Lord, it is too much. It is too much. You did not owe me any of this. You did not owe me anything. And still, you gave me all of this." Anna Clara was born on a Tuesday morning, C-section. B wanted it natural, but Anna Clara was breech and did not turn. I went into the OR in a blue cap, saw my wife on the other side of the surgical drape, saw the teamwork, and then I heard the cry. That cry that splits a father's chest. The pediatrician brought Anna Clara, wrapped in the blanket, put her next to B for a minute, then brought her to me. I held my biological daughter, and here, brother, I need to tell you something important, really important. I thought I would feel something different than what I had felt with David. I thought there would be some kind of deeper, more visceral feeling because she had my blood. But there was not. It was the same exact love. The same tightness in the chest. The same God, this is mine. I had my confirmation in that moment that blood does not make a child, God does. The first person to meet Anna Clara after B and me was David. My mother-in-law brought him to the hospital room. David came in running. He was 3.5. He climbed up onto B's bed carefully, the way we had taught him. B held Anna Clara in her arms and showed her to him. David looked at his little sister, stayed quiet. Then he touched her face with one little finger, and he said something I will carry into eternity. He said, "She is mine." B looked at me. I looked at me. We both held it together so we would not cry in front of David, because he had no idea how big the statement he had just made was. She is mine. Not biological, not adopted. She is mine. It was the most Christian thing I have ever heard a 3-year-old say. David is 5 now. Anna Clara is 2. They sleep in the same room sometimes. On weekends, they build pillow forts in the living room. Anna Clara follows him everywhere. He looks out for her. He shares his toys. He gives her a piece of his cookie. And when she falls and cries, he is the first one running over. That is not biology. That is not adoption. That is God. When I look back, I cannot complain about a single thing. The years of waiting, the pain of infertility, the bureaucracy of adoption, almost losing David. All of it was part of a divine choreography I never could have choreographed myself. God needed me to be David's father before I was Anna Clara's father. And to do that, he had to break me and rebuild me. He had to take from me the pride of a man who thought he deserved certain things because of his own faithfulness. He had to teach me that a child is not a trophy of merit. A child is a gift. And David, my David, he is my biological son in everything that matters. He is my son because I chose him, because God chose him for me before I even knew there was a David. Because every sleepless night, every diaper changed, every fever, every tear of his I wiped away, created a chord no DNA in the world could create. I remember what John chapter 1 verse 12 says, "Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God." God himself adopted us as sons and daughters. He looked at me and adopted me. And when I looked at David in that nursery, I did with him what God had done with me. I adopted him. I said, "This is my son." If you have made it this far with me, I need you to know something. Maybe you are going through a pain that feels like it has no way out. Maybe it is infertility. Maybe it is something else. Maybe it is a marriage in crisis, a sickness, a bankruptcy, a rejection. Maybe you are picking a fight with God right now, thinking he forgot about you, thinking your story only has bad chapters. I want to tell you, with the authority of someone who lived this, God has not forgotten you. The story is not over yet. What looks like the end is just the middle. And the plans he has for you are plans for peace, and not for harm, to give you a future and a hope, like Jeremiah 29 verse 11 says. Trust, even when you do not understand, even when it hurts, even when the phone rings with bad news, even when the test comes back wrong, even when the door closes. Trust, because God is the specialist at turning the impossible into a testimony. He turned my impossible, he can turn yours. Before I close, I am asking one thing. If this story touched you, if you believe in miracles, if you believe God still moves in people's lives today, comment down below the words "I believe in miracles." Comment also where you are watching from, what city, and what miracle you need God to do in your life. I am going to read every single comment and intercede for you. And if you do not know this God I know, the one who changed my story, I invite you to know him. Pray a simple prayer right now. Say, "Lord Jesus, I open my heart to you. Come into my life. Do with me what you did with Raphael. Transform my story." If you just prayed that prayer, comment too. I want to know. Say, "The God who adopts, who calls us sons and daughters, who turns deserts into gardens, who makes flowers grow out of rock, bless you mightily. In Jesus' name."